Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Welcome to the Editor's Garage. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We will begin with some soft prayers and then shortly be joined by His Grace Garuda Das Kaviraj, who you are all familiar with, and we're really excited to have him for a second time with us. So if you could please close your eyes and just fold your hands so that we could say these wonderful prayers together. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastata Desatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhascha kripa sindhuva eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you all for participating in the prayers. And now we have with us our wonderful, His Grace Garuda Das Kaviraj. As you all know, he is a professor of philosophy and religion and has a renowned career in writing books for prestigious universities as Yale and working with Harvard. So we're going to listen to him a little bit more on how we can train ourselves to edit our works to balance between philosophy and practical age, living in the modern age. How can our work be relevant in this age? So welcome, Prabhuji. Haribol. We cannot hear you. You're on mute.
Hare Krishna. Now you can hear me. Good to be here. Thank you.
Haribol. So, Prabhuji, are you gonna speak? Or do you want me to question and answer?
I can do whatever you like. You can program me and wind me up and I go.
Great. So I guess we'd like to begin. I mean, some of the participants have not been there on your previous session. So maybe if you could just let them know about your expertise in writing and why you write and where you're based, so they can get acquainted to it. We can start off there.
Yeah. Well, it all really begins with Srila Prabhupada's desire to see that Krishna Bhakti studies, Vaishnava studies, be established as a field of study. Now, of course, this all arose with the Bhaktivedanta Institute, where Prabhupada was focusing primarily on science. But then there was a few of us back in the day, in the mid-70s, or roughly mid-70s, where Prabhupada was also wanting devotees to be leading scholars in the field of Vaishnava studies. He said he wanted our devotees as heads of departments of religion, okay? So this is his way of saying leading scholars. Honestly, I was never very much of a writer back in the day. This was something I sort of evolved into. Okay, so, you know, back in the day, we devotees, we did everything. I mean, anything that was needed, we did. So suddenly Prabhupada wanted the Bhaktivedanta Institute. He even, at a certain point, wanted to have a graduate school of Bhagavata studies in Mayapur, connected to the University of Calcutta. And Ravindra Swarup was to head it up once he would finish his doctorate. He came to the movement as an ABD, as we say, at least in America, all but the dissertation. Okay, there are many. Now, this would be an American abbreviation, because in England, that's all you do is the dissertation for the doctorate. Whereas in America, you're put through the mill to get a doctorate. You get 2 years of courses. You have a comprehensive exam that is the most frightening thing you've ever done in your life, because they can ask you anything. And then you make a proposal for the dissertation, which has to be accepted, and then you write your dissertation. So now writing begins when you're in graduate school. Now, you don't have to go to graduate school to start writing about Krishna Bhakti. Let me make this clear. But the way I got sucked into writing, and I mean a pile of papers, and I'm not kidding, that I have a pile of papers from graduate school that is higher than I can show on the screen. I mean, I could take the computer over there and show you this huge pile of graduate papers. So that's where one gets this practice in writing. And writing does take practice. I mean, it's something to be refined at one level, but we can talk about that later. But in any case, that's where my writing began, and that's how my writing evolved as a trained scholar. And, moving into the teaching profession, and, they have an expression, publish or perish. So, boy, did I learn that the hard way. After I got my 2 masters and a doctorate from Harvard, I said, okay, world, here I am. And no one cared. I mean, just no one cared. It doesn't matter. There are people with doctorates all over the place. You actually get established, interestingly enough, when you write your first book. This is where even academics take you seriously. Until you've written that first book, no one takes you seriously. So, and I was fortunate enough to publish my first book with Princeton University Press, which in my field is about as prestigious as you can get. And this was really the first time a devotee had actually published in an academic context a piece of Vaishnava writing. So it sort of established a kind of capacity to combine rigorous scholarship, at the same time, devotional integrity. That's a hard combination. That's a tough combination. Rigorous scholarship with devotional integrity. Not compromising on the devotional dimension of it, and at the same time, not compromising on the academic rigor. Now, there are many devotees now going back to school, and, we find that there are so many very talented devotees in academics. Personally, I never liked academics very much. I mean, I dropped out of high school. Oh, I really shouldn't tell people that. It's a shameful part of my life. I dropped out and went to college a year earlier than my peers, but I mean, I don't have a high school diploma, which continues to gnaw at my soul. In any case, so Harika, that is how I sort of moved into the writing field. Writing was, of course, necessary as an academic. Now, as devotees, Prabhupada says everyone should write. Now, we talked, and I don't remember everything from last time, Harikaji. But I remember speaking a little bit about how when we write, it doesn't mean that automatically we should, have it published. Writing is often an exercise for oneself to enter into conversation with oneself. It's a kind of hearing and chanting with and by oneself. It's a way, since Prabhupada says writing is realization, it can be sometimes frightening to read what you wrote. I mean, oh my gosh, did I write this? Oh my God, it's no good. At the same time, and my wife will do this sometimes to entertain herself. She'll read something in a discussion that we're having, that a deep philosophical discussion that we're trying to work through, and so on. And she'll read something, and I said, yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Who wrote that? She said, well, you did. I said, that's a nasty trick. That is a nasty trick. Well, okay. So the fact is, but you know what's instructive about that is that when we write, something comes from us, apparently, it goes down on the page, but then it's separate from us. It's separate from us. It takes a life of its own. And we don't remember everything that we write, especially when you write a lot. So it's a very rich enterprise, writing. And writing, of course, is very dependent on reading. Or you can put it in the broad bhakti terms. There's no question of kirtanam unless you've engaged in shravanam. I mean, think about the baby humans. Have you ever seen those? The little baby humans? They're quite useless. They don't do much. They're cute. They're very cute, but they're fairly useless. I mean, they don't have linguistic capabilities. Even their limbs are not very useful. But what they're doing for several months, many months actually, is they're hearing. So human life begins with hearing. Oh, when they're speaking, they're just, what comes out of their mouths is generally non-linguistic utterances, which if you insist, I can imitate, but I don't think you want to hear me, gurgle like an infant. The point is that they're hearing, and the more they hear, the more they're able to speak. So this is here, shravanam. Shravanam is the lacking in our writing is a lacking in our reading. So ironically, to talk about writing, we also have to talk about reading. How do we absorb what has been written by the Guru Parampara, especially as it comes together in Prabhupada's essential works? So I'm going to stop there, Harika, just because I've said quite a bit, but I can say more. I mean, honestly, I can speak for hours. Okay, so I have to cut it off at a certain point. Jagadish, I can see you laughing there. Okay, uh, um, so anyway, it's funny to see people laugh without sound. You know, I had a professor at Harvard, my main professor. He was an extraordinarily excellent example of scholarship, but on a personal level, he was a little odd because whenever he would laugh, I'd be in his office and something funny would come up. I would laugh and you could hear me laughing, but he used to laugh without anything coming out of his mouth. So he would go, kind of like looking at Jagadish Hari laughing while he's on mute. But I know that he's bellicose like anything over there. But my advisor, Harika, would laugh without sound. He went mute when he would laugh. It's the strangest thing. Anyway, you deal with strange people in academics. What can you do?
Yes, we do. That was a wonderful recap of our previous session. And I remember you mentioned a really important point, like, you know, in this process of writing, you took us through, you know, the drafting process where you really vividly explained that we have the doggy and the cow and
Oh
then
my
the
God.
cat draft.
Did I talk?
Which is,
Did I do the animal zoo? Oh
yeah,
my
you did
God.
the animal zoo, which is, I think
Oh,
most
how
of
embarrassing.
our viewers today, they'd be interested to know what that process was and why you believe that editing process is so crucial, as you mentioned, you know, to bring out this first book, because many of us have not written a book. We don't come from a writer's background. And how can this editing process of the first draft, second draft, you know, help us establish this perfect writing that is our offering to Srila Prabhupada?
Yes. You want me to speak on that? I mean, the editing part?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Please do.
Yeah, the editing part, like right now I'm working on a bhakti vision of the Yoga Sutra, which my thesis for that book is to view the Yoga Sutra through the Bhakti Vilochana, the eye of bhakti. You have a more complete understanding and interpretation of the Yoga Sutra than you would by a Sankhya-driven understanding, which is what most of the commentators do of the past, and what present interpreters of the Yoga Sutra do, if they're not looking at it from a Buddhist perspective. Wow, a Buddhist perspective. One of the things that I'm doing is I have a few godbrothers of mine to whom I am reviewing my translations. And are they ever beating me up? You know, they read something and they go, what does that mean? Why did you do? They start questioning me. They start pummeling me with you know, I have to defend myself. I mean, it's worse than my doctoral dissertation defense at Harvard. I mean, they're like questioning every little bit. Now, sometimes they go, wow, okay, that works. You know, that aphorism or sutra text, that makes perfect sense. They get to the next one, and then they say, oh, I don't know. And then they start talking amongst each other as if I'm not even there, and start criticizing the hell out of what I've written. And I'm listening to this, and then they come back at me with all kinds of, it's fantastic. I know it sounds horrific, but it's fantastic to submit your work to peers. Now, you know, I know there's all these, you know, there are all these, you know, Kandama Kanana Swami and Vaisheshika, there are all these articles going up on Dandavats. Don't criticize a devotee. Well, you know what's funny about that? Even the title is, well, inherent in that title is you're criticizing your reader for criticizing devotees. So, I mean, we have to be careful what we write. why are you assuming that everyone in the Dundavat world is criticizing devotees? So don't criticize devotees is a criticism of your reader, because you're assuming that they're criticizing devotees. So they're doing the very thing that they're telling us not to do. We have to be careful about what we write. I say, bring on the criticism. Anyone who feels like they need to criticize a devotee, call me up and criticize the heck out of what I've written, okay? Because through constructive criticism, we can come up with extraordinary work. Really, we can. Harika, I mean, you wouldn't believe how much better, I mean, I'm being very, shall I say, vulnerable here, okay? Okay, I'm being very vulnerable. My translations are so much the better because of my extremely critical godbrothers that are giving me a beating. I mean, I'm telling you, they are giving me one heck of a beating, okay? By the way, one of them is in England, a Kundadi. Yeah. So, but of course he has that very nice, polite British accent, but it doesn't fool me. I know the content is awful while he delivers it in such proper English. So I'm not fooled by it, you know? So, I love talking with Kennedy and several other godbrothers. So here's the principle, Harika. The principle is bring your writing to others. Try it on other people. Now, this is if you want your writing to have an audience. Now, if your writing is just for you, well then, you know, that's private. That's private. You don't need to bring your writing to anyone unless you have a confidential friend in whom you've placed a good deal of trust, and you know, you just want to share your thoughts, you share your mind and your heart. Okay, that's fine. That's one kind of writing, almost like diary writing. But if you want your writing, well, for example, Yale, I mean, to get your work published by Yale or Princeton or Oxford, which is what I do, it's like wearing a target on your front, you know, on your back, on top of your head, and on both sides. I mean, people are going to read your work and they're going to critique the heck out of it, okay? So, you know, when you put your work out there, expect criticisms. Now, in the devotee world, so I translated the Bhagavad Gita for HarperCollins, a huge trade publisher, world trade publisher. And I once came across a Facebook thread that I couldn't respond to because I wasn't anyone's friend that on there. I don't know how these things work, but where they were all criticizing me as a person as well as the book. So I was reading along some of the most ghastly things that they were saying. So I decided to write to each one of the 7 members who were participating in this kind of, you know, condemnation frenzy. You know, that's kind of like, let's chew Garuda up. You know, let's put him through this process of mastication. You know, just like, you know, see what's left of him once we've all, you know, chewed him up like lions with carcasses, you know, that kind of thing. And so I wrote to each one of them and I said, I have seen your comments and the thread, and I actually am interested in your honest and sincere criticism. Please critique my work, but I've noticed that none of you on this thread have read my work. So it's odd to me that you're critiquing it and you haven't read it. That's a little odd, but you're even critiquing the fact that I would even do a translation. So I'm willing to undergo any and all questioning. And if you can actually guide me to a better, greater elevation of performance in my devotional service, I will discard the former and I will enter into the new guided approach that you give me. I said, and I even said, if you can find something wrong with the Gita that I've presented, I'll remove it from the market. So engage in dialogue. See, dialogue is the major thing. It's not criticism that itself is the problem. The problem is when it is not in the context of dialogue. Criticism is fantastic. Bring your criticisms to Garuda Das. Criticize the hell out of him, no problem. But enter into dialogue. That's where it makes sense. And as a writer, you want criticism. You want it if you hope to have your writing speak to people. Now, recently, with Bhakti Charu's departure, who is a very old and dear friend of mine, I mean, we've stayed together in different places, and we never did any devotional service so much together, except when he put me on some GBC subcommittees years ago, which I yelled at him for doing because I don't want to be on a GBC committee. But anyway, but back in the 80s. Anyway, but the point is, when he left this world, I wrote a piece on grieving the loss of a Vaishnava. And it has, I think, nearly 1,200 views. And I wrote this thing fairly quickly, but it spoke to so many people. And I got emails thanking me for this because people were going through just terrible phases of grieving. And then there are other people leaving their bodies, and there are other devotees leaving. And that's why I kept it, on grieving the loss of a Vaishnava, because there are just so many that are departing. Bhakti Charu is particularly, known, widely known and loved and adored by so many, but there are so many adorable Vaishnavas that are leaving us. So here was a need, and I wanted to address it, and I wrote something. Admittedly, I did not put it before anybody else. I completely wrote from my heart what I felt devotees were crying out in a way that they were needing something. They needed some guidance on how to move through the grieving process. So I gave that to them in a matter of a few pages. So there I'm not even following my own advice. All right, okay. So, I'm a hypocrite. And now, but the thing is this, when you have been writing for so long, when you've been teaching for so long, when you've been lecturing for decades and writing for decades, and then when your whole life is breathing and, what you're thinking about writing or what you've been writing all the time, then that more easily flows. But don't expect from yourself something to come out immediately and be, smriti. It's funny, in the academic realm, my students in the university, they think their first draft, namely their doggy draft, they think it's holy writ. They think this is like come from the gods. This is like, the next revelation for the universe. And I tell them, I can't even write that way. Why do you expect to write that way? There are very few people I know who can write that way. Ironically, my wife writes that way. I don't know how she does it. She doesn't know what a doggy draft is. My wife actually doesn't know what a doggy draft is. And I am very jealous of her. I don't know how she does it, but she writes. And when she writes for these online periodicals that are very difficult to get into, and she wrote a book review for the well-known publisher Shambhala Press, and because the editor of this online writing blog asked her to do this for Shambhala, and the editor at Shambhala said, "Wow, superb writing." And I just am so jealous of my wife to be able to write that way. Anyway, I'm glad she's not here listening, because I really can't, tell her that. But anyway, the point is this. All right, can different people have different relationships to writing? So it's not like, an easy formula. Some people can write like Krishna Kanta does. She just writes this incredibly gorgeous prose that's rich. But I'm a little bit more of a technical writer, okay? I have to write in a way that is academically extremely solid, and I have to write with such precision. So every single word has to be just right, and there can't be any extraneous words, and there can't be a lacking of words. It's just like a pictorial composition. If something is distracting from the focal point, it must be removed. There's a sense that composition means everything there has to be there in order for it to work, and anything extraneous that is there is draining the composition of its power and potency. It's a balance. There are two kinds of sculpting, right? There's the one sculpting where you take the chisel and you pound away at the medium. And then there's the other sculpture where you take clay and you build it up. In writing, you're chipping and you're building, you're chipping and you're building, and you've got stone and clay all the time. Stone and clay, stone and clay, stone and clay. Chisel and hands, chisel and hands, chisel and just exhausts me just to even talk about it. Why did I even agree to do this? My gosh, I shouldn't even come to this session that makes me suffer so. Writing, there's no, you know what, Harika? There's no easy way to say it, but writing is a very challenging task.
Yes, I agree. It is very challenging, and editing is even more challenging. So that brings me to the next question, which is, you make such a wonderful point where you suggest that, constructive criticism is an essential part of a writer's life. But how do we balance, between philosophy and making our works practical in this age? How do we balance between making sure that our writing has the concept of, where Prabhupada says, do not compromise, you have to follow Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. At the same time, how can we make our works, what editing techniques can we use that can make it relevant to people of the modern age, so that we can make our work can make sense and meet people where they are? As we say, writing is a process of the heart, but is editing a process more of the head, or is it still an art of the heart?
Whoa, okay, you've got a lot there. Let's see, let me just close this a little bright. There we go. Okay. We edit for refinement. Sometimes when people have the donkey problem, right? That's writer's block, right? Donkey, the jackass. You can't. Sometimes you can't get a donkey to move, right? They're stubborn, right? So that's the animal for writer's block. Okay, the donkey problem. And the way I tell people to start writing is, look, you're too self-conscious about how you're writing, what you're writing. And typically people expect a cat draft to come out the first thing, like what Krishna Kanta does. But Few people can do that. So I tell them, write how you speak. And they look at me like, well, how do I do that? And then I look back at them and say, you do talk, right? I mean, you do speak to people, don't you? I mean, you do talk. So if you talk, write as you would talk. Just write down as you would talk. And if you need to, pretend that there's someone in front of you. Do sort of an anthropomorphic projection onto your computer. Your computer's a person, okay? And you're talking to it. And sometimes even answering a question helps. Figure out the question to which your writing is an answer. So these are ways of getting yourself to write. So just get something down on the page, then leave it alone, let it marinate, if that's even a good term, marinate, let it sort of settle or, get some distance from it. Go take some prasadam, right? Come back, forget that you just tortured yourself with a bunch of, forced words on a page, and come back and then take a look at it. You've had some distance from it, and then sort of look at it with sort of new eyes, because now it's separate from you. See, what came from you is now on the page. You've had a little distance from it, time-wise, temporal distance, and spatial. You come back and you look at it, and it's as if it's another being that you can critique. So again, so you're kind of, you intentionally are jerking yourself around so you can be effective as your own editor. You can also think about, like, what would happen if I gave this to my friend Harika? What would she say? And then you can kind of imagine Harika's mindset and go, oh my God, oh my God. If she read this, she'd freak out. Look at this. I better change this, Think of your audience. Who's going to read this thing? Oh my God, I could never present this before a devotee audience. Look what I say here. Oh my gosh, I'm dreaming about dragons. How do I present that before devotees? Okay, Jagadish. Okay, he's doing that silent laugh thing again. Okay, so oh, okay. I didn't really want the unmuted laugh. That's fine. I like it muted, honestly. Okay. Just with my doctoral mentor, I didn't like it because he was literally sitting in front of me. So it was a little odd. So you become your own critic before you get others to critique it. So you ask yourself, could I really present this in front of whom? Are we talking about a devotee audience? Are we talking about, seasoned devotees? Are we talking about new devotees? Are we talking about persons who have yet to appreciate Krishna bhakti? Is what we're writing attractive to them? Are we sensitive to our audience is really what it comes down to. How well do you know your audience? This is true for any kirtanam. When you sit down and talk to someone, are you sensitive to your audience? Do we just, the old Sunday feast. I remember we, just sit down with newcomers and so on. And I used to see devotees sit down with people and didn't find out anything about the person. They don't even know who they are, loaded a bunch of Krishna consciousness on them, and they walk away kind of like, oh, I guess that was kind of interesting, Now, the funny thing about writing is that you can't directly hear your audience, the audience for whom you are writing. But you've got to hear your audience. You have to know your audience. So your writing will be altered there would be a tremendous difference if you didn't know your audience and you wrote something, and then you came to know your audience and you wrote on the same subject. It would be vastly different. To be sensitive to the thoughts and feelings of others is the most challenging thing. And to give people what they really need and want and desire. To be alter-centric, centered upon another, and not egocentric. We can even be egocentric with Krishna consciousness. You know, I need to preach to them. I will turn them into devotees right now. Here you go. Boom, right? I mean, that's just egocentric. It's just using Krishna consciousness to be egocentric. To be truly a servant of Krishna means to serve Krishna in their hearts, to serve them in their inability to hear Krishna in their hearts. This is such an art. This to evolve this level of sensitivity is so important, Harika. So this is what I'd like to emphasize and underscore here. Know your audience. If you're writing for others, you had better find out exactly what the other is all about. If you're writing for people in jail, criminals, well, then you should understand what criminals go through the justice, through the process or whatever, the adjudication process, what their inmates on death row, inmates, in isolation, understand what it is they are going through. They are human beings, albeit, destructive ones, but you had better understand who they are, what they're about. Otherwise, you're blindly going in and you're kind of hoping that something will catch, and something could catch. I'm not saying that it doesn't catch, but you're just not very powerful at that level.
That's a very interesting point, that we need to meet our, the people where they are, and we need to write to cater for them. So
to be sensitive, to be sensitive to their needs, So
that gives us some leverage with, like in the sense Prabhupada says, do not compromise. But can we compromise for our audience because we are trying to cater for what's, to fit something that speaks to their heart?
Okay, when Prabhupada says don't compromise, what he's saying is, he's not saying, okay, to not compromise means to make sure you're drawing from somewhere in our philosophy. So if we find ourselves going off the reservation, so to speak, and going into areas that really have nothing to do with Krishna consciousness, then that is our lacking. Because there is so much in our books, there is so much that if we find ourselves going off into self-help, I have, honestly, Harika, I have seen God brothers who are senior to me at Sunday feasts in Alachua bring in Stephen Covey's, 7 Habits of Highly Effective Individuals or something like that. I don't know the book. I don't know what even those 7 effective habits are. Maybe I should read it. I don't know. But anyway, the point is, when you find yourself going to outside literature, self-help literature, as if it were Shastra, there's a problem there. There's a problem. You haven't read deeply enough into our literature. That is a symptom. Now, that's not to say that you can't engage outside things. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that when you rely on that, and this Sunday feast was focusing almost solely on this in relation to how devotees can be better devotees. I'm sorry, I object. I object. I mean, people here may not agree with me, and that's fine. But I don't want to hear your criticisms. Oh, wait a minute. I said earlier that I would. Okay, in dialogue, that's fine. Okay, good. I'm trying not to be hypocritical. Okay. Jagadish, it's amazing. I can hear your laughter even when you're on mute. I can hear it. It's just horrific. It is just a horrible thing. Okay. In any case, we have to challenge ourselves to go more deeply into the philosophy that Prabhupada gives us. But here's, and I've been involved in the controversy, about the editing of Prabhupada's books and so on and so forth. But here's what I'm even more concerned about. I'm more concerned about how Prabhupada's books are being heard. Whether devotees, I'm more concerned about how Bhagavatam class is given. I hear Bhagavatam classes that never, ever come around to the ultimate point of Krishna bhakti. They may focus on hogs, dogs, camels, and asses, or how women should never be given any freedom. I hear stuff like this. I hear stuff that is effectively peripheral and even slanted, because there's a lack of total understanding of even those statements. What to speak of a lacking of tethering all of this to the ultimate point of why we're here and what we're doing. On your deathbed, are we going to be thinking about hogs, dogs, camels, and asses? I hope not. At least I hope I don't think about asses. I don't hogs, dogs, and no, I don't want to think about camels either. I don't like camels very much. I was in India once and a camel spit at me. I didn't like that very much. So I don't want to think about camels. Jagadish, you should be very upset that you heard this news, okay? Anyway, the point, yes, you are. Of course you are. In any case, the point is that these are peripheral aspects of our philosophy, of our vision. We have to be careful to always bring in the very highest point. This is what Krishna says. In the last verse, he speaks to Arjuna. In the 18th chapter, 72nd verse. This is a very didactic verse, very instructive for all of us. In his rhetorical question, 2 rhetorical questions in that last verse, in those last words he speaks. The first one is what I'm mostly concerned about. He says to Arjuna, have you heard this whole teaching with thought focused on the single highest point? Ekagra. Eka agra. Agra, summit, highest point. Eka, the single highest point, like a mountain. Oh yeah, all this stuff, hogs, dogs, camels, and asses are somewhere down here. Okay, fine. But unless you bring in this up here, it's useless. I know I'm being a little extreme here, but hey, you need some drama over there in England, right?
Yes, I think that's very essential, getting the highest point and still balancing it out by listening to the audience. Now, you
exactly.
did mention that, you did experience some challenges, especially when you were editing Prabhupada's books, and that was a different time, a different era. Is there something you could share with us on how you overcome that challenge, as an editor, that we can utilize? Because I know there's a few editors on board and they come across different challenges. So maybe if you can share, something about that challenge that you experienced in editing.
Yes. Okay. So editing, there are different kinds of editing. There's proofreading, there's copy editing, and there's content editing. These are not strict categories. They can kind of blur their edges. Proofreading editing is simply trying to see if I've misspelled, dog, or misspelled God. I spelled it D-O-G instead of G-O-D. I mean, that's a pretty important correction. I mean, am I talking about God or am I talking about dog? Okay. So a proofreader will see by the context that obviously I'm talking about God, I'm not talking about dog. So we got to correct that immediately. Even though dog is actually a word, sometimes, T-E-H is just a typo. So typos, misspellings, really obvious things that need to be corrected. That would not at all take away from the voice of the author. That would not detract or diminish the voice of the author. Now, copy editing is more along the lines of proofreading, but it also can be some content editing, but under the approval of the author. Has to be done according to the author or with the approval. Proofreading is the prerogative of a publisher. Copy editing and especially content editing, which copy editing can involve a little bit, those changes must be done with the approval of the author. What we're finding in ISKCON with BBT is that editing has been done. Content editing, copy editing has been done without Prabhupada's approval. And so the voice has been diminished. Prabhupada's voice has been, in effect, taken away in some instances. And in some instances, the philosophy was changed. Now, I can tell you about an instance where I was sitting on the couch in the BBT office in LA. And Dravida was there, sitting on the other end of the couch. I was sitting in one end of the couch. Rameshwar was there. Premananda Vilas was there. Others were there, about 10 others. And Rameshwar brought up something that was very disturbing to him. He brought up a change that Dravida made in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. There was no problem with the English. So it was purely a content issue, purely a content issue. And Dravida, what it was is Prabhupada said, when the jiva is in the tatastha shakti, Dravida changed it to the jiva is the tatastha shakti. And Rameshwar brought that up to me and to us in this group. It was like a little workshop group. And Dravida said, well, I changed it because it doesn't make any sense. I said, well, wait a second. You're saying it doesn't make any sense. Are you telling me it doesn't make any sense to Prabhupada? Are you telling me it doesn't make any sense to me? Or are you confining this just to you? Anyway, so I questioned that. He said, well, I changed it because elsewhere, Prabhupada always says the jiva is the tatastha shakti. So here, I changed it back to make it make sense. I said, so you're telling me that Prabhupada needs you to help him make sense. And he said, I'm not saying exactly that. I'm saying that this is not making sense and is not in accordance with what Prabhupada has said in the past. And it doesn't make any sense to me. I said, well, I can tell you right off the bat how it makes sense to me. Right off the bat. I haven't even looked at this. He said, really? How? He challenged me. How? I said, when Prabhupada says the jiva is the tatastha shakti, this is making an ontological assertion. When he's saying when the jiva is in the tatastha shakti, he's making an existential assertion. If you understand philosophy, Dravida, his jaw was dropped, and he said, well, I never thought of that. And I said, Dravida, are we reading Prabhupada's books through what you can think of and what you cannot think of? The principle here is nothing gets changed without the consent and authorization of the author. Authorization. Here's the point. So in your own writing, Karika, if you send me something you've written and I want to publish it somewhere, and I just really rearrange it, and I just get it published, and suddenly you see it published, you should call me up and yell at me. Garuda, what have you done? Even if it's better. Even if it's better, it's still, I have no right to do this to an author. And a deceased author, I still have no right to do that to. So, author means you are the absolute authority and absolute responsible person for what you've written. Not even a God can force your hand to write what you've written. What you've written it comes from you. You are the person who's totally responsible for it, and you are also the person who is the total and absolute authority over that which you've written. Does that make sense?
Yes, a lot. It makes a lot of sense that we need to look into our work and be the authority in it. Instead,
Yes.
like what we're experiencing as editors now in the project that we're doing is people love to write, and they're writing from their heart.
Yes.
And they're sending in so many amazing pieces, but at the same time they're exceeding the limit. There's certain word limits. So
yes, word limit.
It's really interesting where you mentioned that they need to come in and act as an authority and look at the work and see where have I gone wrong, and not just be dependent on the editing team. So it's sort of like that dialogue where you suggest.
It is exactly
in the editing process.
Exactly, and that's how I started off today's talk. I said, come and criticize me as much as you want, as long as it's in dialogue.
Yes, completely. I completely agree with that point.
Yeah.
Because then you have the people connection, and they will embrace, these edits that you are, conveying to them. This constructive criticism then really helps them to transform the work.
Yes.
So
there's nothing like an amazing editor. There's nothing. I mean, there really is nothing like it. I mean, an excellent editor who is sensitive to the voice and yet sensitive to the audience for whom this voice is intended. An editor who can really preserve both, as far as I'm concerned, is an angel from heaven who came down. I mean, it's just, it's just.
That's wonderful, because that was leading me to the next, and since we're running out of time, just to wrap up, it was leading me to the question, the golden question, which is like, what three things does this angel editor, what is the checklist of like an angel editor, what characteristics, or what are the three things that they need to ensure in order to be a perfect editor, the angel editor?
Yes, the angel editor. Well, for one thing, it helps if they have done some writing themselves. Just like if you are trained to be a psychiatrist or a psychoanalyst, you're supposed to also go in for a good bit of psychotherapy. So what you're inflicting on other people, you've had inflicted on yourself. So, if you're gonna prescribe medicine for that person, you better take the medicine first yourself and see what it's like. So that's one. It's not a necessary qualification in and of itself, particularly, but it's helpful. It is very helpful. That's one thing. The second thing is, if an editor knows grammar. Most people, they don't like to know grammar, but most people, they don't know, what an adverb is. I mean, they just don't know. What to speak of a participle, a past participle, present participle, a future passive participle, a future active participle. They don't know what these things are. To not know grammar is like having a human body without bones. Now, you know, my body would work without bones because all the organs are there, right? It'd just be a little bit of a mess on the floor. I mean, it just, you know, I'd be a blob. It would lack structure. It would lack form, you know, but it would be more compact and you could put me in a box and carry me around. The idea is that grammar is the structure of language. And if you can have an understanding, it's like an artist who sees textures and perspective with his or her eye in a way that ordinary non-artists don't. They don't pay much attention to that when they're seeing. But an artist always looks at things in light of perspective, in terms of light and darkness, textures, and so on. So it's about developing the eye for editing, which essentially is a knowledge of grammar. So grammar is pretty important, I will have to say. You know, what is a dependent clause? What is a clause? What is a dangling participle? What's a misplaced modifier? What, you know, and all of these things. I mean, grammar, a writer may not know grammar because they're so talented and they just have a feel for the language. That's my wife, Krishna Kanta. She doesn't know what any grammar is. Okay. I know everything there is to know about grammar. I know grammar upside down, back and forth, upside down, back and forth, whatnot. And I don't come out with, you know, a cat draft the way she does right away. So the point is that grammar doesn't necessarily help you with writing, but with editing, it kind of does. Now, you know what? You can also have a Krishna Kanta talent in editing as well. You can just have a sense of it. So there is, we have to make room for those who just have talent that way. Okay, good. But be aware that there are these different dimensions. Are they practiced at writing themselves? Do they have a knowledge of grammar? And then, of course, there's always experience. Do you have a history of successful editing? When you edited Garuda Das's work, was he really appreciative and thankful, or did he yell at you and say, "I never want to see you again in my life"? You know, that kind of thing. I mean, what, did you have a good experience or a bad experience? Were you successful? Were you not successful? So there are these dimensions. And then, of course, there's always the advantage of being a seasoned devotee. When we're talking about editing devotional writing, we're talking about being a truly seasoned and, how do you say, just a very dedicated, seasoned, experienced devotee. Because when we're talking about devotional writing or writing by a devotee, even in a non-devotee sphere, knowing their motives for writing in that non-devotee sphere, that to be really sensitive to, I know Prabhupada always called it preaching. I call it teaching and sharing. Bhakti means sharing. Even the verbal root of the word bhakti, bhaj, means to share. So we're about sharing and we're about teaching. Preaching can sometimes carry the connotation that it's kind of a one-way street. That's not Prabhupada. If Prabhupada were a one-way street, he would just write the books and never have written any letters to anyone. Do you know how many letters Prabhupada has written? Thousands of letters. This is what makes Prabhupada superhuman. I mean, he did all this writing, which is itself a little incomprehensible to me, but I'm trying to wrap my head around that. But then once I think about all the time he took on morning walks to converse with devotees and all the time he took to write to devotees these thousands of letters, I just throw my hands up and say, this is a super Herculean. No one can do that. No one has done that. So this is Prabhupada teaching and sharing. The letters counterbalance some of the content of the teaching. Although the teaching has primacy, the letters show how Prabhupada molded the teaching, made exceptions to the teachings. You might say compromise, but I would say customized rather than compromised the teachings. And a really good teacher is able to customize without compromise. How does that work? As long as the customization puts a devotee in the direction of meeting the standard, then that is not compromise. If customization makes someone move away from the standard, then that's compromise.
I think that's a perfect note to end with, and a wonderful thought that bhakti is all about sharing, and who better to learn from than Prabhupada himself, where he customized all the different people, and you brought us together in one home where we're all united. I mean, thank you so much for sharing your time today and giving us this wonderful session on your editing techniques, and bringing in the most important aspect of it being the dialogue, and how necessary it is to get criticism, but also when giving criticism, having that people connection, having that dialogue. So I really want to thank you from my heart, Prabhuji. Thank you so much once again for joining us. It has been
thank
amazing.
you for the opportunity, Harika. But I do urge you to consider, greater qualifications for your membership here, because I see you have Jagadish Hari here, and just tighten up the qualifications a little bit, okay?
Sure, we'll definitely look into that constructive
Yes.
criticism.
Yes, please do. Yes, I think I'm urging you to do so. Yes, exactly.
So I'd just like to open up, this session to any questions. If anyone has
please.
any questions, you could turn on your video and go ahead and ask Prabhuji, your questions before we end this amazing session. I mean, we can keep going on and on, but time is limited, so you might as well open it up for some questions.
Oh, there is something in the chat, Harika. Will there be any more session?
Yes, Prabhuji, in the future. Hopefully, if you have some time for School of Bhakti, we'd definitely love to have you again.
Oh, they're asking about me. Oh, yeah. I'll just say to Rajiv, it's totally up to Harika whether she wants to invite is the word I was going to say. Invite me back, yes.
Yes, for sure.
I'm sorry about see, I edited my words. Inflict, I felt may not be quite appropriate for your group here. So, okay.
Yes, we look forward to having you again. For sure, Rajiv, we will have more sessions. And if you're talking about the next session of the Editor's Garage, we'll be having 2 more sessions tomorrow. So if anyone has any, burning questions, please go away, ask your questions.
Yep, please feel free to ask anything.
Oh, I have a comment rather than question. You mentioned how the babies, the first sense that develops is hearing, right? They listen, and that's how it absorbs. Once I heard that also that's the last sense that goes out before really.
Yes,
so
very good.
Very interesting how devotional service starts with that.
It starts and ends. That's right. Beautiful, beautiful point. Maybe you should keep Jagadish. Yeah.
That's Shravanam. Everything starts from Shravanam, and then Kirtanam, which is a wonderful point you made. Someone wants to ask, is there anyone else who'd like to ask a question?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question.
Yes.
Go ahead, Rajiv.
So when you are doing the writing process, or what advice would you give to someone who wants to start writing? Like, is there a structure of, maybe you should write like a template, or where do you start basically?
Where do you start? Well, first of all, you might want to think about, for whom are you writing? Are you writing for yourself? I mean, in one sense, your question is a good one, because, but yet at the same time, it's an obvious there's an obvious way to answer, because if I call you up on the phone, it's kind of obvious how you should speak with me, right? Garuda, who are you? I don't really know you very well, and why are you calling? I mean, that would be the obvious thing to say to me if I call you up, right? So the question really would be, for whom are you writing? That you might want to determine that first and foremost, because writing is a form of communication. Now, it can be for yourself. It's a form of communication for yourself and for Krishna. You can be writing for Guru and Krishna. So that's the first thing. And once you determine for whom you're writing, that will dictate the format of your writing. Well, I mean, let's say you're writing for children. Well, my gosh, if you're writing for children, your sentences are going to be shorter. You're going to use a simpler vocabulary. You're going to be making sure that the content is absorbable by children. So what do you think, Rajiv? Does that make sense? Those principles?
Yeah, the way you start, like who your audience is. And I think you explained that earlier in the talk as well. Once you know, and also understanding your target audience, who you're writing for, and being sensitive. So I guess before you even put pen to paper, it's about understanding who you're actually are trying to address and what you're trying to communicate. Well,
yes.
Who are you trying to communicate to? Yeah.
Yes, no, that's, I like the way you're articulating it. That's very good. It gets a little weird when you write for a huge worldwide publisher and you're wondering, who's my audience? And then you say, well, everyone. I mean, that gets a little bewildering. How do you write for everyone, right? So, while you have the luxury of choosing the audience for whom you're writing, take advantage of it. If it's just for yourself, or if it's for your friends, or if it's for this group, for example. Maybe it's for this group, But, when you write a book for, Oxford University Press, you actually don't know whose hands the book is going to end up in. I mean, you just don't know. So so for me to think about my audience becomes really I get a headache, because I guess the book could have so many audiences. So sometimes I have to focus on one part of everyone more than another part of everyone. And so that becomes complicated. So when you become a widely published author, that's tricky. Now, when you go online and you're publishing a blog on, let's say you found BBB, Bashing Buddhists blog. Okay, so you go on there, and the sole point of that blog is to bash Buddhists. Okay, now I'm not saying I just made that up, by the way. This is a ridiculous thing. But you know what? You know what you're there for. Now, if you start reciting your own version of Winnie the Pooh on, Bashing Buddhist blog, that's just inappropriate. I mean, it's just like, that's not what they're looking for. So, I'm giving you ridiculous scenarios, but all to make the simple point is, we have to know our audience, to define it carefully as much as we can, and take advantage of that. If you're writing for a certain group of people, but you don't know them that well, then first you get to know them better, and then start writing for them, that kind of thing. Or get to know them as you're writing for them, look at their reactions, oh, this doesn't mean anything to me, Rajiv. I mean, thank you, but no thanks. Don't let that stop there. Get them to critique you. Well, what do you mean it doesn't mean anything to you? What, show me, give me an example. And then they could give you an example. And then you can hear what it is that they're expecting, what their expectations are, what they hope for. And now you're getting into their minds and their hearts. And now you'll write better.
Thank you. That's an amazing guidance.
Great. Wonderful. Good luck with it.
Thank you.
So thank you, Prabhuji, once again for joining us today. We will have to end this session here today. Before we go, 3 Hari Bols for, Garuda Das Prabhuji. Hari Bol, Hari Bol.
Haribol, Haribol, Haribol.
Haribol, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure to
We
serve all
will
of you.
definitely organize a future session again, probably a different workshop, but we love to have you. Thank you so much.
No problem. Again, you just, program me, wind me up, and I start, marching along.
Jai, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.
Jai
Jai.
Prabhu.
Hare
Thank you.
Thank you, Hare Krishna.
everyone.
Thank you. Be in touch.
Hari Bol.
Jai.